Greetings to all of you, chief executives and all the distinguished guests who are here. And of course, our team from the AU have two commissioners here, Commissioner for Infrastructure and Trade and some officials, and some people from our regs. So thank you very much. I'm really honored to address the 6th Africa Investors Summit at a very important moment in our history. This year, as has been said, we're celebrating 50 years since the formation of the Organization of African Unity, which became the African Union. And this anniversary comes at a time when a number of developments on the continent are a cause for optimism, cautious optimism, but optimism all the same. Africa has seen sustained growth of 5% over the last decade, accounting for some of the fastest growing economies in the world, and with a growing middle class, now numbering about 300 million. The continent also received a large share of global foreign direct investments in 2011, and that grew by 27%, and pushing the share of the world's investment to almost a quarter. Investments by Africans into Africa as a proportion of total number of FDI projects was reported to have more than doubled in 2011, starting from a low base, but it's a good trend. It accounted for 17% of all new FDI projects. But of course, I know your interest is mainly on infrastructure. And coming to that issue of infrastructure is, in a way, for us, on one hand, is a key driver for growth on the continent and has to be, especially the ICT, transport, energy. At the same time, it is a constraint for growth when it's not there. So we need to really get going in getting the infrastructure there, because it will further push our growth, but at the same time be a catalyst and really unlock the continent for a future growth. And and I think we should also take advantage of new technologies, just as we have seen in telephone connectivity. The continent has been growing by 10% per annum in mobile phones between 2006 and 2010. And the continent has become the second largest mobile market in the world after Asia, with an estimation of about 620 million mobile connections. So we can see that in the ICT, we've been able to some extent to leapfrog and not start from where the Industrial Revolution started. And I think we should do that in infrastructure as well. In transport infrastructure, which is very critical, we can't even talk about intra-African trade because we can't move the goods and people across the continent. So we must talk about highways, we must talk about rail. And when we talk about rail, there's new technologies now. I hope when we talk about rail, we're talking speed trains. We're not talking the old goods trains. But because it's important that we leapfrog, we get into new technologies, because the continent really needs to unlock its potential. It's got enormous potential. It's a huge continent. And of course, the map of the world doesn't do justice to the size of our continent. In our continent, we can fit the United States, we can fit China, we can fit India, we can fit Western Europe, and there'll still be space for a few more. So we are a huge continent with a huge potential. But I think we also need to have a mindset that says it's possible. It's possible for Africa in the next 50 years to be in the league of the US, in the league of China, in the league. We just need to do it. We have the resources, we have the human capital. If we invest in it properly, there's nothing. In fact, I was shocked to reading through many things that China was poorer than Malawi just more than 30 years ago. Where is it now? Why can't we be there ourselves? It's possible. We just need to stop being prisoners of our past and our present situation and realize we can fly. But of course we need roads, we need rail, not only for movements of goods, but also for people. China and India together, in the next 20 years, they'll be having more than 300 million tourists a year going across the world. What proportion of those tourists can we get into Africa? We can't if we don't have the relevant infrastructure, but we can if we do have the relevant infrastructure, and it's possible. So I think we really need to take that energy. Again, going through a lot of things, I was shocked that sub-Saharan Africa generates the same amount of energy as Spain. One country, Spain, generates the same amount of energy as sub-Saharan Africa. And half of that energy that we generate is in one country. So, which means we need to do a lot more in energy if we are indeed to become this prosperous Africa that we think we should be by 2050. But yes, it's a shocking statistics, but we must look at it as an opportunity to do a lot more in that area. Transnational energy, solar in villages, and so on. I think we can combine geothermal, we can combine a lot of different a basket of different energy generation. Of course, we have a lot of water on the continent, but it is still a problem that if we look at developing countries, most of them, 88% of the people there have access to water, which is far less than what we have here. And of course, if we look at paved roads across the world, many more developing countries have got much more paved roads than we have. Sub-Saharan Africa, only 20% of our roads are paved. So by 2009. So the infrastructure deficit of Africa, I'm just trying to show a few areas, is both a challenge and a great opportunity. On the one hand, weak energy supply, poor and non-existent transport and port infrastructure, and lack of broadband connectivity are definite brakes on economic and social development. And on the other hand, a brake also on the ability of the continent to integrate. But at the same time, our relative late development in these sectors means that we can use the latest technology to address our infrastructure deficits. Of course, the other important aspect of the assets of the continent is an asset that everyone has, and it's our greatest and most precious, it's our people. We on the continent do not have the largest population, but we have a large population of about 1 billion strong. But it's a young population. And the projections are that by 2025, a quarter of the people under 25 will be living in sub-Saharan Africa. Now, let's think about what that means. What are the implications of that? A quarter of the world's under 25 by 2025 will be in sub-Saharan Africa. We need to think about that very carefully, because handled well, it's a huge asset. But mishandled, it's a huge liability. But if we can link what we're talking about in infrastructure, water infrastructure, social infrastructure, we link with agriculture, with the industrialization that we're talking about, and begin to plan for those skills and make sure that these under 25s will be properly educated, skilled, and will be able to get jobs that match the needs of the economy. And they will themselves also be innovators if we ensure that science and technology is a critical part of that research. So we have a huge opportunity in the coming years if we manage all these things well. Of course, by 2050, it's projected that the population here will be more than 2 billion. And of course, still young. And by that time, more than 1 billion of people would be working people. So can you imagine if we ensure that their creativity, their energy, there is an environment that allows them to unleash their creativity, their innovation, our economy can actually grow and exceed other economies. We still have a lot of arable land in this continent. If you look at non-used arable land in the world, 60% of it is in Africa. And of course, that's a huge asset that we can use to produce more food. Of course, we'll need to feed the 2 billion people by 2050, and it's not a joke to feed 2 billion people. But if we utilize that land, increase productivity on what is under cultivation and increase more, invest more in agriculture infrastructure, invest in agro-processing, we have still got huge potential. And of course, we've got potential on minerals, mineral resources. Every other year, one country or the other discovers oil or gas. So I think the opportunities are endless, but we need to work together to ensure that we actually capture the momentum, we capture those opportunities. Now, from the AU side, we have decided to use this celebration, the 50th anniversary. We're going to have a year-long celebration. But the best part of that celebration, we want our citizens, because the AU has to be driven by its citizens. We want our citizens in all their formations to reflect not only at the past, important as it is. Yes, they must reflect to the past, but not dwell too much on that rearview mirror, but look forward and say, that's where we've come 50 years on. Where are we going in the next 50 years? We'd like business people, intellectuals, artists, women, youth, to spend this year of celebration discussing this important issue. Where do we want Africa to be in 50 years? And what steps do we need to take to get there? And what would be the concrete benchmarks in 5 years, in 10 years, in 20 years? And we want, by the end of the year, to have received inputs from all sectors. We'll put it together. And in January 2014, we're going to present it to the heads of state. And then it should be a framework within which Africa develops. When we go out to partners, to anyone, we say, this is that's where we want to be. These are the steps we want to take. This is where your sector can fit in. And we think that is important because if you don't dream, you will never do. We think it's important to say, and I will be bold, I won't be there 50 years, but I'll be bold to say, in 50 years, Africa should be described as a prosperous continent, at peace with itself. So in 50 years, our grandchildren shouldn't be bothering about conflicts and all that. That should have gone. In 50 years, they should be living in a prosperous Africa, continuing to build the prosperity of this continent. And I think if we think that way, we can also achieve it. We had a meeting with our RECs not so long ago, about a month ago, the regional economic communities, and we agreed to form a few task teams, joint task teams. One of those task teams is on infrastructure, because we want to work together as a unit, and when we look at infrastructure, we must look at it as a whole. The second task team that we formed is the one on skills, because we think skills are a critical component, both for the economic development, but also for social stability and for human beings to reach their potential. The third one is on industrialization, led by our NEPAD, but working with the AU, with the regional economic communities. And then we formed a fourth one. I hope it will interest you, of women. How do we integrate women? Women on our continent, as elsewhere, are a great asset. And it makes business sense, it makes social sense, economic sense. It makes every sense that women are part and parcel of all areas of human endeavor. And so we've just formed those a month ago. We're going to be working together and making sure that at least those 4 areas we can really drive. And so we hope that by next year when we meet, we will be making very concrete presentations to you. You can make concrete presentations about how to get the money, how to invest it, and so on. But we will also be making concrete presentations about where we want to go on each of the major areas. We have NEPAD, but we need to consolidate everything and have a long-term view. Those are some of the things that I thought I should just share with you, and wish you a very successful 6th summit, and say that we are going to be together every step of the way, but we have to dream big and act with speed and determination. I thank you.
Doing business in Africa, you can't afford to be without Africa Investor.